once again to the Kyle Report, and of course I'm your host, Chuck Lee. We're coming to you live from the beautiful downtown L.E. Phillips Memorial Library and Taco Stand on this beautiful August 28th, 1995 afternoon. I know school's back in now, so everything's back to normal in the thriving metropolis of Eau Claire, and I want to welcome all of the viewers today that would like to call in later on. We'll have a call-in portion of the program, and also we're going to have another segment from the Iowa straw poll that Fred and I traveled to as reporters and press with press credentials, and we got right in there within touching distance of all of the 9 Republicans that are running for President of the United States. And also today we'll be, as usual, discussing things with my rusty, trusty sidekick, Fred, chasing the girls in Iowa, Stafford.
Well, that's not me.
You were sitting
chasing any girls there.
You were sitting next to a pretty blonde down there. I noticed that.
Well, I couldn't help that. You were the one who picked that seat out for me.
Well, I thought I would make you comfortable for the several hours that we were in that giant palace down there. What was there? Must have been, I estimate, over 12,000 people. About 11,000 voted, so there must have been a good close to 12, maybe 13,000 there. They're way up to the rafters and on the floor and everywhere. But anyway, Fred, as usual on this program, we try to stump the stars. And since we don't have any stars today, you sit in as the alternative star to be stumped. So on this day, August 28th, 1963, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. delivers a resounding speech in Washington, D.C. to 200,000 civil rights advocates. King's speech that day has since been called the I Have a Dream speech. Who gave that speech and in what year?
Well, I know it's Martin Luther King.
All right.
The Reverend Martin Luther King.
It's a pretty famous speech.
Yeah, that's, what shall I say, that's...
just 3 months before John F. Kennedy was assassinated.
Yeah, I don't believe that that was such a great speech, because he says things that he didn't mean.
And what year was that speech?
63.
That's right. Well, you know, Fred, he said he'd been to the mountaintops, and he no longer feared death, and 5 years later he was dead. But that speech goes down in history as one of the great speeches of United States oratory, whether we like it or not, or whether you like it or not. I thought it was a pretty good speech for 1963.
I thought it was pretty good, but it's not. He didn't live up to that.
Well, he only had 5 more years to try.
I know he had.
Of course, you had J. Edgar Hoover hounding him with secret wiretappings, and the Kennedys were...
Well, he was promoting communism, working with the communists in his undertakings, going to the Communist Party meetings in New York City of the National Commission of the Communist Party.
Okay.
That doesn't come out in the papers. They don't seem to want to print things like that.
Of course, those were rough and tumble times back in the 60s. It was almost like a civil war went on from about 62 up all the way up to 1970. There was a Vietnam War and civil rights movement, and there was agitation going on from all sides.
And the Communist Party was behind a lot of it.
All right,
even in Kent University.
Well, that was what year was that? That was a little bit later, but it was rough times, Fred. Okay, well, Fred, getting back to issues of the day here. Recently, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, you know, the ones who bring us Big Bird and Barney, the billion-dollar boondoggles, they bring in billions, Fred, in advertising dollars and in sales of those products. Recently, the Congress had a chance to shut them down, or at least curtail their public funding to a large extent, and
Did Newt Gingrich follow through on that, or did he soft pedal it?
Well, actually, Newt Gingrich breaks his pledge. Tim Graham, associate editor of Media Watch, a conservative newsletter, said he's been pessimistic that Congress would do anything dramatic about funding for public television. if the Speaker of the House had put some muscle behind it, something might have happened. But after initially vowing to zero out the Corporation for Public Broadcast Funding, Mr. Gingrich backtracked and said he regretted having made that statement. Of course, he regretted it because people pointed out to Newt that he took a lame duck Congress and pushed through NAFTA, which dumped something like 40–50 billion dollars into the hands of Mexico, but actually in the hands of Eastern United States bankers who Mexico owed.
Yeah.
So it was a bailout of bankers. So Newt took heat because he was willing to dump 40 billion down a rat hole down south, but he wasn't willing to continue financing Big Bird and Barney. So he stepped into a pile at that time, because that was all kind of swirling around at the same time there, Fred. So once again, Newt shows his true colors and proves that he is not to be trusted, Freddie.
Well, he also put through gas, which is further eroding our sovereignty and so forth, and giving foreign nations the right to call shots here.
Another area, Fred, where Newt dropped the ball and allowed the pro-homosexual, pro-abortion forces in the Republican Party to sway his thinking was on the Planned Parenthood funding that came up under the Title X funding, and it ended up the House restored $193 million in funding for Murder Incorporated, otherwise known as Planned Parenthood. Well, Newt was supposed to lead the charge on that, but instead he rescued Planned Parenthood, the subsidies that the taxpayers paid to it, and helped push that through so that they got their funding to continue the slaughter of innocent babies. Now, on a related note to that, Fred, I just picked up off of the Reuters news service, there was a law that went into effect in Ohio. And Ohio has become, this was dated August 17th. I don't remember reading much about it in any of the major newspapers, but Reuters carried it on that date. Ohio has become the first U.S. state to outlaw a specific abortion procedure, setting a penalty of up to 5 years in jail for physicians who perform dilation and extraction abortions. Now, that was the type of abortion where the anti-abortion activists call the procedure brain suction, because the so-called fetus, more than 20 weeks old, has the contents of its skull vacuumed out so that the skull actually collapses and makes it easier to remove the dead baby from the mother's womb. So that has been outlawed. It only affects about 200 abortions in the state of Ohio annually, but that's 200 less abortions that will be allowed to be done in that cruel and inhumane manner, Fred. Actually, they take a live baby and they pull the head out enough to where they can somehow insert a vacuum into the brain, and they suck the contents out of the brain. The baby's head collapses down flat so that they can remove the body. It's a very gruesome and nauseistic type of procedure, and Ohio is leading the way by making that illegal.
Be nice if they do something like that in Wisconsin too.
Now, also, Fred, this law in Ohio is kind of a pattern. It's going to be kind of a test pattern for federal legislation on that same issue. It's going to be eventually working its way through the House and Senate. And also, besides outlawing dilation and extraction abortions, the new Ohio law requires viability tests on all fetuses older than 21 weeks. No fetus or baby that can live on its own can be aborted by any procedure, unless the procedure is necessary to save the life of the woman or to preserve her physical health. So there you have it, Fred.
Yes.
The federal government is looking to that Ohio ruling and that Ohio law.
The federal government or Congress?
Well, both. They're looking at it, Fred. They're watching it closely. I'm sure the ACLU will try and move in and stop it with the help of various functionaries within the federal government, but Congress and hopefully Newt New World Order Gingrich will stand up and fight that. Make sure that that becomes law of the land, Fred.
Would be good if he did. But don't hold your breath.
I mean, that kind of procedure, Dr. Mengele and the other butchers in Germany who experimented on World War II prisoners, they pretty much equal in their barbarity, Fred. There's not much difference there. Okay, Fred. And you can also say that both those, in both cases, the person being experimented on is being held captive. That little baby, 23 weeks old, doesn't have any choice in the matter.
Yes.
And also the prisoners during Hitler's reign didn't have any choice either. Okay, Freddie. Another area that we like to get into is we already had you answer one question, Fred. We're going to get another one, and then we're going to go into this 15-minute footage that we have from Iowa. But first of all, if you have a short 1 or 2 minute statement there that we can discuss, go ahead. What do you got there, Fred?
From the American Family Journal, and this is a headline: Visa USA top sponsor of sex, violence, and profanity. And among those who made that list is Visa, Anheuser-Busch, Sara Lee Corporation, Toyota Motor Sales, MasterCard International, Paramount Commission, Maybelline, Adolf Coors, that's Coors Beer, Zima, and Clear Malt, MCI, and that's the telephone company, Bristol-Myers Squibb, and Unilever, United States. The 12th one was Coca-Cola. And it went from 34% of their advertising down to 18%. So that's the garbage that's coming into our home via television.
Well, it's amazing, Fred, what people will watch. But of course, these ads and commercials, they hit you right at the end of a program you're watching, and before you know it, it's already embedded in your brain. Your eye catches it and registers it in the brain, and they say that is stored in there then the rest of your life. Once that image hits your gray matter up there.
That's very true.
And so that's why some of these ads just hit you with all kinds of images and thoughts and stuff, knowing full well that they only have a certain amount of time to embed that in your brain. Kind of like brainwashing, Fred.
I know.
All right. So, you know, I guess there's some other things coming down the road, too, about people pointing out what some of these big corporations pay for. A lot of them finance pro-homosexual and pro-abortion causes, and when the consumers find that out, they quit using those products.
Well, they should.
Mm-hmm. All right, Freddie. We are going to ask you one more question now, and then we're going to go to that about a 14-minute clip of Senator Arlen Specter, Fred.
Oh.
Now, you and I saw him give that glorious speech down there in Ames, Iowa, 2 weekends ago. Actually, just a little over a weekend ago.
Iowa State University, right?
Right, and he gave an exciting speech down there, Fred. They were on the floor, jumping and yelling.
Yeah, they were booing him.
All right, Freddie. 1968, the Democratic National Convention is interrupted by anti-war protesters, including Abby Hoffman, as Hubert Humphrey wins the nomination for president. Hundreds of protesters are beaten by police. We all saw it on the news back during that summer of '68. And
they provoked the police.
It was quite a confrontation up there.
And the media was told where they were going to do it, so they were there.
Well, that national convention with Hubert Humphrey.
Chicago.
That's what I was going to ask you, Fred. Where was that national convention held?
Chicago.
And that fiasco up there denied Hubert Humphrey the presidency, and Richard Nixon swept into office.
Right on.
In 1969, actually November of '68, and took office in January of '69. And some say that was the end of an era of liberalism in the United States, other than the 4-year aberrations of Jimmy Carter and the guy we got in there now, Clinton. So, Freddie, we're going to go to this film now of Arlen Specter. If Roy Rogers Hoff is ready to roll in there, we will go to that footage now. Are you ready, Roy?
Shares the same hometown as Bob Dole, Russell, Kansas. This former prosecutor relishes debating ideas and joining the fray. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senator Arlen Specter. Here's your tax return under an Arlen Specter presidency. It'll take you 15 minutes to fill out. It is pro-growth. It will increase the gross national product, 20% flat tax for most businesses and corporations. For those of you who can't see in the rear, and for a photo op, this is what it'll look like. Now, contrast that flat tax with the Bill Clinton health care program. Here it is. Every box in red is a new agency board or commission. There are 105 of them. And every box in green is an existing bureau getting new bureaucratic responsibilities. There are 47 of those. Bob Woodward of the Washington Post said that this chart was the critical factor to bring down the Clinton health care program. I'm a fiscal, economic conservative and a social libertarian. I'm not unused to some differences of opinion. And let me deal with that subject head on after I tell you about my solid conservative credentials in supporting the line item veto of the balanced budget amendment. A leader on the war on crime, based on my experience as a district attorney, the only candidate running for president who has had hands-on experience actually trying rape cases, robbery cases, murder cases. And I'm a social libertarian in the mold of Barry Goldwater, who said we ought to keep the government off our backs, out of our pocketbooks, and out of our bedrooms. Now, I know there's a sharp difference of opinion in this hall tonight, but I come to give you my view. My view is Barry Goldwater's view. teen pregnancies and support of tax breaks for adoption. I don't have any effort for applause, thank you. But I want to take abortion out of politics. I want to take abortion out of politics, and I think that drew more cheers than boos. Dan Quayle wrote in his book, Standing Firm, that the 1992 convention turned off many people in the hall, many more watching at home on television, and was a key factor leading to the defeat of the Bush Plan ticket. And who can know better than that ticket? When I debated Pat Buchanan on Meet the Press, we had a little more time to discuss the matters. Pat Buchanan, who debates these matters with civility, Pat Buchanan disagreed with Dan Quayle and said we were involved in a religious war, and I disagree with that head on. And when Pat Buchanan wants to return to a fortress America, I disagree with that. I think America has its own rule of world. And has to have a strong role in the world. I think that the UN peacekeepers ought to be withdrawn from Bosnia because there's no peace to keep. We ought to lift the embargo on the United States air power, ought to make the Bosnian Serbs rue the day that they committed the atrocities in that conflict. I think internationalism is a vital part of America's role for the future and America's role for destiny. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Nixon identified the Republican Party as a 4% factor, and I have no doubt that many are here this evening, but let me remind you that in tonight's address, I speak to the balance of the people of Iowa, and I speak to the people of America. 71% of Republicans support a woman's constitutional right to choose. Disagree with. I'm tired of seeing candidates for public office pick on immigrants. And I'm tired of seeing candidates for public office pick on minorities and pick on women. I feel very strongly about that because both of my parents were immigrants. And I think we have to protect our borders. That immigrants have made America strong, and immigrants have made America the great nation that America is today. to win the White House if we return to our core values: smaller government, less spending, reduced taxes, strong national defense, and effective crime control. I do not believe in a litmus test, and I am deeply offended when people say that if you're pro-choice, you're not fit to be a candidate. Like my colleague Rick Santorum, who is pro-life, while I have supported nominees for the Supreme Court like Rehnquist and Scalia and Thomas, and anybody who wants to impose a litmus test on America is going to destroy America. Let me make a comment or two about Bill Clinton. President Clinton may be down, but he is not out. He's going to be a tough opponent to beat in 1996. And let me say a word or two about the straw poll this evening. At a time when integrity and character give us a great advantage, I question the wisdom of having an Iowa straw poll, which is not for Iowa. I'm sure the people of Iowa wouldn't go with that, so those booze must be coming from all those buses that came from all around the country. My colleague Senator Grassley, who has a 97% recognition factor in Iowa, said he walked into this hall tonight and nobody knew him. At a time when there's enormous challenge that money is too important in politics, I don't think the Iowa straw poll ought to be for sale, but I don't think you ought to buy this straw poll. Ladies and gentlemen, I have very strongly held convictions about where America ought to go. And I intend to continue this fight forward. And I intend to continue this fight to the 71% of Americans who would like to bring the Republican Party back to the center. Tonight, and I say to Republicans around the country, I'm going to lead that fight. I'm going to preserve the Constitution, and we owe it to the next generation to win the next election. Thank you.
Okay, Freddie. Well, there was a page out of history there, Fred. That'll go down in history as one of the lousiest speeches ever given to that many Republicans at one time. Almost 14 minutes of solid booing there. I think you got one little response of favoritism there, but other than that, it was a resounding boo fest there for Arlen Specter. And of course, you know, he's running.
I rather admired him, especially after his handling of Anita Hill and the hearings, but he certainly has come down in my estimation.
Well, also he gave us the pristine bullet theory back during the Kennedy assassination years when they found this bullet that had hardly been touched. It looked almost like it came out of the store untouched. The lead part of it was laying on, supposedly laying on President Kennedy's stretcher. So that's where it was found, but this bullet had went through a couple bodies and hit part of the car and traveled through the air quite a bit, and it came out the other end hardly even dented.
Jack Ruby, I think, was the one who put it on the stretcher.
Well, anyway, whoever did it, Fred, it just didn't wash, but Specter was one of the young lawyers that helped wash it, get it through the Warren Commission, and get it embedded into American memorabilia in written form. So that was all on Specter, Fred, and he's quite the character. I think out of almost 11,000 votes, he got 80-some, 60 or 80.
Yes,
Yeah.
I don't think it was 80.
Maybe it was 67, or somewhere in between those
Yeah.
two figures. Well, Freddie, before we are accepting calls this afternoon, and I hope we will get in somebody that will call in and want to respond to that Specter speech or what we're talking about today. Fred, there's a religious equality amendment coming up in Washington, and a lot of Christians have attached their hooked onto this as a star that's going to save the Christian movement in the United States and keep this country Christian. But a reporter named Sam Francis in the Washington Times on July 25th stated that despite the Supreme Court's momentary retreat from government-enforced restrictions on religious expression, the crusade to wipe out the remnants of Christianity out of public forum continues. And Christian activists who are trying to resist the crusade are often their own worst enemies. Their most recent counterattack is a little package of banalities known as the Religious Equality Amendment, which would finally and officially concede that Christianity is not the public canopy of the nation, but merely one amongst many competing and equal creeds. The amendment, strongly supported by those legitimately worried that federal decrees have all but suppressed any public allusion to religious beliefs, forbids federal and state governments to stifle any prayer or religious expressions in circumstances in which expression of a non-religious character would be permitted. With Supreme Court rulings that have banned prayer in public schools, restricted the display of religious symbols in public Christmas exhibits, and even led to the banning of display of the Ten Commandments in school hallways, the Religious Equality Amendment looks to some like a step forward, Fred. But the truth is just the opposite, a concession by Christian activists that they no longer claim the United States is a Christian nation in any sense. Having forsaken that claim, the activists are now contenting themselves with staking out merely an equal place in the sun of secularism. Under the amendment's willowy terminology, religious expressions by any faith, from Satanism to devil worshiping, would be protected equally with Christianity. So in other words, all religions of the world will rise up to Christianity in the eyes of as far as the law of the land of the United States, which in other words will turn our country into one big paganist boondoggle, Fred. And then when they slip in this school prayer thing, on Monday you'll have a Satanist prayer, on Tuesday you'll have a Buddhist prayer, on Wednesday you'll have a Catholic prayer, on Thursday a Jewish prayer, and on Friday you might have a Christian prayer. So you got to watch how you're tiptoeing around this school prayer issue, Fred, because you could be slitting your own throat.
Right.
You could be introducing millions of school kids to Satanism. So I would rather have a moment where, or a couple minutes where a child could pray in seclusion or wherever, without forcing everybody in that school to have to listen to all these various prayers that would be read over the loudspeaker. Because you can imagine that witchcraft and everything else would be read, Fred. The New Age movement, Gaia, Mother Earth, they'd have the kids all rolling around hugging trees, worshiping Gaia one day, and then worshiping Buddha or Confucius the next. Is that what you want, Freddie?
I certainly do not.
Well, then you got to watch the school prayer thing, how they word it. All right, Freddie, we're going to take our first call of the afternoon. We might remind you that we are live on television, and so we don't put up with any profanity or any other shenanigans on here, Fred.
Yes.
We cut you off at the ankles. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air. Hello? Sounds like we got a dead phone in here, Freddie.
Oh, we got it back.
Okay.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. How you doing?
Okay.
Is this John?
John.
Who's
No,
this?
this is the Cow Report.
How you doing?
Fine. How are you this afternoon?
Good.
You like watching this program?
Yeah.
What part do you like best?
The call report.
Good. Of course, you remember Fred.
Yeah.
Hi there.
You and him had a protracted conversation the other evening.
Yeah. Hi, Fred.
Hello there.
Remember Fred? Remember him, Fred?
Yeah.
Where do you live?
I live in Eau Claire. So, do you have a question today for the viewing audience?
Have you been a farmer all your life?
Have I been a what?
Farmer all your life.
A what?
Farmer.
Farmer? A farmer all my life. No, when I was a kid, I helped my grandpa on the farm over in Minnesota, and I was at a wedding Friday over in Minnesota with all my relatives, and I come to find out that my relatives are from Wisconsin. I had a great-great-great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather that was a farmer who joined the Wisconsin Cavalry
That's cool.
during the Civil War, 1862, down by in Fond du Lac County, and came back to Wisconsin after the war, and traveled around the Midwest. He was in Ohio and Wisconsin and Iowa and Minnesota and I think South Dakota. And so I do have some farming in my background. It goes back at least to 1830.
That's cool.
Of course,
Yes.
farming nowadays is not a rich man's sport or a rich man's way of getting rich.
No, it's not.
It's for the strong-willed people that are willing to work 12, 14, 16-hour days,
Yeah?
milking every day of the week, 2 or 3 times a day. It's a tough life, and it's not for the faint-hearted,
No.
but it's a good, clean life, and
Yeah.
anything that our state and federal government can do to encourage farming and to get people back into farming at a young age would be helpful and beneficial to this country as a whole. So, did you have any question for Freddie before we move on here?
Fred?
Yeah.
Can I have your hat?
No.
Where'd you get it?
What?
Where'd you get it?
I got it from Pat Buchanan.
What kind of hat is it?
It's a Pat Buchanan hat.
Oh, it's
Go,
cool.
Pat, go.
It's cool.
I'm glad you like it. I do too.
What kind of hat does the other guy have?
Who, that guy?
No, you.
Who, me?
Yeah.
Oh, this is a chainsaw hat.
Pretty cool. Steel?
Yeah, chainsaw.
Where'd you get it?
My son got it somewhere.
Mm.
I think he went and looked at a chainsaw and they gave him a hat.
Mm. Well, I gotta go.
Okay, well, thanks for
Bye.
calling in. We appreciate those.
Fred?
Yes.
I'll talk. Can I get your address?
He'll get Roy Rogers Hoff, the engineer supreme, in there in the background, and just stay on the line for a second and he'll give it to you.
Okay.
Okay, thanks a lot.
I want his address.
Yeah, Roy will give it to you.
Okay.
Bye. All right there,
What do
Freddie.
you want my address for?
Probably wants to come down and visit you. Take that hat away from you. Now, here you've been getting a lot of comments on that hat around town.
A few comments, that's all.
Now, do people know what that means? Go, Pat, go?
I don't think they do.
Some probably think it's for Pat Robertson.
Maybe.
All right, Freddie. On this date, or actually a couple days from now, August 30th,
Mm-hmm.
you should remember it like it's 2 days from now. 1862, Confederate forces led by Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson rout Union forces at the Second Battle of Bull Run. What war was that?
Civil War?
That's right. And who was the general in charge of the Confederate forces?
Robert E. Lee.
That's right. And another famous general was Stonewall
Jackson.
Jackson. Stonewall later on was killed during the Civil War, and they say that the loss of Stonewall Jackson pretty much knocked the wind out of the Confederate forces, and from there it was downhill. They didn't have that great Southern leader, Stonewall Jackson, to lead them into battle, and
Yes.
unfortunately, the war ended the way it did with occupation by Northern forces of vast territories in the southern part of the country and left a lot of bitter memories up till this date, Fred.
Yes.
Okay, Freddie, I think we have another call, and then we're going to go to hear a little bit of what you got there and
Yes.
as far as information.
Oh,
Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
I'm back again.
You are?
Yep.
Well, what's going on?
Fred? Fred?
Yes?
Where do you live?
I live in a house
Okay,
on
well,
the south side of Eau Claire.
all right, well, Roy should have caught that before that got through. All right, Freddie, what do you got there?
Teachers support Gay History Month. The National Education Association, NEA, passed a resolution at its annual conference in July supporting the recognition of October as Lesbian and Gay History Month, according to a Washington, D.C. based newspaper for homosexuals. The Blade reported the resolution offered by Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Teachers Network passed by a 2-to-1 margin. This is an important milestone, said Rodney Wilson, a Missouri high school teacher who made homosexuality public as a part of a history lesson. The NEA represents 10 million teachers throughout the United States and is a leader in educating our society about sexual orientation.
Well, that's amazing, Fred. You know, another issue that's heating up is this immigration, anti-immigration, illegal immigration onslaught that's continuing to happen on our southern borders.
Yeah.
Just reading recently in San Diego area, something like 65,000 illegal aliens were caught crossing the border in 1 month. That's over 2,000 a night were caught, and they say that the majority of them are getting through, Fred, so it must just be like a flood down there along those southern borders, people trying to come in. And that's in the face of this glorious NAFTA treaty that Gingrich and company helped push through for Clinton.
Yes.
Helped rescue out of the jaws of defeat. Well, Fred, another area out of control is the immigration, and unfortunately the implementation of Proposition 187 in California has been blocked. That was a proposition to start stemming the flow of the illegal aliens into California. It's been blocked perhaps permanently by a federal judge. Judge William Matthew Byrne Jr. has suspended California's efforts to deny benefits to undocumented aliens based on what he regards as a serious question as to due process violations, liberty interests, and also property interests. So in other words, now he's extended these American freedoms to illegal aliens who belong by crossing the border to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
We have reached a sorry state in our nation's history of persons coming into this country illegally are now regarded as having a property interest in receiving welfare benefits, Fred.
Yes.
In fact, we cannot continue to encourage foreign nationals to disregard our laws in this fashion and expect to survive as a nation. Already, according to a November 25th, 94 edition of the New York Times, 1 out of 4 federal prisoners is not a U.S. citizen. And in addition, 28,000 non-citizens are serving time in state prisons. Now, Mr. Stockman, Congressman Steve Stockman, has introduced an amendment. His amendment would allow states to refuse to provide welfare benefits to non-citizens. In addition, it would check the dangerous practice of sneaking pregnant mothers across the border into the United States in order to confer citizenship on the newborn by delivering him or her in the United States. Finally, Stockman's amendment would make it clear that naturalized citizens must speak English and that only citizens may vote or be counted in legislative apportionment. Because in some of them southern congressional districts down there, Fred, the balance of power now is shifting to Spanish-speaking illegal aliens who have figured out how to vote in the local elections illegally. So Steve Stockman, phone number 202-225-6565. Let him know how much you appreciate his leadership on this important issue. United States Congressman Steve Stockman.
Yes.
Okay, Freddie, what do you got there?
Ex-Disney porn film released unrated. And this is from the American Family Association Journal. Kids, the disowned Disney porn film has lost its appeal to change its rating from NC-17, formerly X-rated, to R. The film has been released without a rating. And a man who has played a part in that, the firm is Miramax. They spent $3 5/10 million making it. And Miramax's co-chairman, Harvey and Bob Weinstein, formed an independent company named Excalibur. Excalibur purchased the film from Miramax and took it to the Motion Picture Association rating board, where it received the NC-17 rating. And Excalibur hired well-known liberal attorney Alan Dershowitz to appeal the rating.
So what do you think about that, Fred? What's it mean?
Well, I think people got to wake up that Disney is not what it was supposed to be. Years ago, Disney was good, clean fun. They made wonderful pictures. They had some beautiful theme parks. Now they're going for the smut, for the obscenity.
Well, they have subsidiaries. I think Touchstone Films is one of them, and they even have one that's a little more raunchy than that are subsidiaries of Disney that put out the dirtier productions, Fred, so that they try to keep Disney fairly clean and wholesome for the children and young adults, but they wanted to get in on the R and the PG-13 stuff, so they used the other production companies for that.
Before Disney purchased Miramax about 2 years ago, Miramax released other X-rated films without their ratings, including Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, The Cook and the Thief, His Wife and Her Lover.
Okay, Freddie. Well, another important bill that's coming down the road here in Washington is Senate Bill 269, Fred.
Yes.
I don't know if you've heard much about it, but this is the National ID Card Bill. And imagine an America in which every citizen would be required to carry a biometrically encoded identification card as a precondition for conducting business. In other words, right out of the book of Revelation, you won't be able to buy or sell without the mark of the beast. Well, would be an identification card that would allow you to buy and sell in the United States. And if you don't have it, you're liable to get arrested and escorted out of the country, even though you might have generations going back to 1700s that have lived here. Now, another one, Fred, and this I have personally read that this has been being studied, and there has been grants by the government handed out. They're doing studies now to scan your retina of your eye. Every time you needed to prove your identification, they would scan the retina, because each retina is like a fingerprint, Fred. Not everyone has the same one. So they could scan the retina of your eye and tell if you're actually Fred Stafford. Now imagine carrying a card with your entire medical, academic, social, and financial history. Now imagine that bureaucrats, police officers, social workers, and teachers have access under certain circumstances to the information on your card. Finally, imagine America in which it would be illegal to seek any employment without approval by the United States government, Fred. In early September, the Senate Judiciary Committee will vote on S-269, the Immigration Control and Financial Responsibility Act of 1995. The bill has already been passed by the Immigration Subcommittee and is sponsored by Senators Alan Simpson, a Republican from Wyoming, and Senator Dianne Feinstein, a Democrat from California. The House version of the bill is H.R. 1915. The Clinton administration is in support of both these bills. They argue that the best way to control illegal immigration is to give the government the right to approve all employee hiring in America, Fred.
Yeah.
So it's going to be tougher to get a job unless you prove that you are loyal to the present regime in power And they're even going to, what they call codify it, make it law of the land, Fred, that you will have to carry this ID card, national ID, or you won't be able to buy or sell within the borders of the United States, or probably the greater borders of Canada, United States, Mexico, and whoever else gets into the NAFTA New World Order bandwagon here that is developing, Fred. So what do you think about that, Fred? Are you going to take that mark?
No.
Well, how are you going to buy or sell? What if the government says you're not going to get your Social Security check anymore?
Well, sir, I challenge it.
You and many others, but I'm sure they'll be able to put up chopping blocks on every street corner,
Well,
take care of you.
Might as well chop away.
Yeah.
That's a violation of my freedom.
Well, unfortunately, Fred, our freedoms are slowly being taken away by so-called conservatives like Newt Gingrich, who are hell-bent on getting us into this New World Order under the United Nations flag of surrender.
Another fellow named Senator Bob Dole.
Well, he's a great internationalist, too. Okay, Freddie, so what do you got there?
I see that ABC says education top-heavy. The percentage of the nation's education budget spent on administration has doubled in the past 40 years, according to ABC's Prime Time Live, May 3rd. Diane Sawyer began the broadcast by wondering about education being underfunded. Is this really the problem? Americans are now paying more than 4 times what we paid in the 1950s for education. On average, we pay as much per student in a high school as in some private colleges charge. Back in 1950, 2/3 of the money budgeted for education was actually spent in the classroom on education. By 1992, less than 1/2 made it there, in part because the percentage of budget for administration doubled.
Huh.
And that's from the American Family Journal.
Okay, Fred, well, just today, we have a news release from Reuters News Service out of Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a standoff developing up there between Native Indians and Canadian police. It escalated Sunday when 2 police officers were ambushed in a hail of bullets, but the officers escaped uninjured. The 2 were hit by automatic weapons fire during an attack in the remote interior of British Columbia, where a group of Indians have occupied part of a cattle ranch for about 2 months. The officers escaped injured because they were wearing bulletproof vests. According to the Canadian police, the officers were met by an ambush situation and they encountered several rounds of machine gun fire. A band of Indians have erected an armed camp on a private ranch near Gustafson Lake, about 275 miles north of Vancouver. The Indians contend the land is sacred and are seeking to reclaim it, although most Indian leaders have denounced their effort. There's about 30 armed Indian rebels and supporters are holed up in the camp and refuse to lay down their arms, Fred. So we could see another bloodbath developing up there now, especially since gunfire has been traded. Thankfully, hopefully, no one will get injured, but so far nobody has. It's just a matter of who's going to hold out the longest, either the Canadian police or the armed Native Indians up there, Fred. One guy said the head of the Ovidi McCready, head of the Assembly of First Nations, which represents Indians across Canada, condemned the ambush as a criminal act. The Canadian Press news agency reported. McCready sought to mediate the dispute for 2 days without success. It is an act of attempted murder. It cannot be condoned and it will not be supported by Indians across the land. He also criticized police, saying that they had heightened tension. He warned the police to learn from a 1990 crisis in Quebec where a police officer was killed in a botched raid during a 78-day standoff, Fred. You might remember that one. They overturned cars on the roads and the Indians took over a section of land and said, "This is ours. We owned it before you came in here after the Revolutionary War and started grabbing our land, and we want our land back." So there was a 78-day standoff then. Well, now it's shifted to British Columbia, where the Indians are reasserting their rights to native lands up there, and there's another standoff in progress, Fred.
Yes.
Hopefully it'll turn out without any bloodshed.
I see here also in the American Family Association Journal, end zone prayer included in non-spontaneous celebration band. College football players who kneel to pray after a touchdown may be cited for unsportsmanlike conduct according to new rules from the National Collegiate Athletic Association, NCAA. The new NCAA rules are aimed at banning non-spontaneous celebrations from the playing field and also include such acts as players doffing his helmet on the field or high-fiving a family behind the end zone.
So in a lot of circumstances, you'll see a football player, when he gets in the end zone, he'll kneel on one knee and pray. Or a fighter will pray before and after a boxing match. But now, just that player kneeling and praying is outlawed, huh?
Yes.
Even though he's not requesting anyone else to join in, it's just his way of thanking God for allowing him to get the touchdown. Well, you know, Fred, at one time in this land, Christianity was basically the law of the land, and over the last 40 years, we've seen all those Christian pillars chipped away at, to the point now where this amendment we discussed a few minutes ago will be put into law, where it'll protect Christianity, but it'll also protect every other religion or pseudo-religion under the sun, make them all level, Fred, so that we'll see all kinds of stuff coming in. And that's how far this country has deteriorated. Of course, the Clintons are trying to accelerate it. I noticed they've removed a lot of religious symbols on federal buildings all over the land. Some of them they've given away, some they've sold priceless pieces of artwork and Bibles and stuff for pennies. Others they've crated up and put in the basements of these federal buildings. But they have put out an order to remove any Christian symbols in the land. So they are working overtime.
Well, it's about time that the people woke up as to what the Clintons are trying to do.
Well, if heaven forbid if God ever takes his hand off this country, Fred, and he's close to removing his hand, when you have an ungodly person in the White House, the leader of the land, God looks at that leader and says, this land is no longer under my protection, because God judges nations, and if this nation is not a Christian nation, then it's a heathen nation. He no longer has his hand of protection upon it, and you will see mass destruction from natural and human-caused calamities, Fred. We've seen that in the last few years, especially under the Clinton regime.
Yes, I see here we have an article in the American Family Association Journal, Lawmakers Offer Parental Rights. Representative Steve Largent, Republican, Oklahoma, and 60 co-sponsors introduced the Parental Rights and Responsibilities Act of 1995. In the House of Representatives on June 28th, Senator Charles Grassley, Republican, Iowa, and 3 co-sponsors introduced it in the United States Senate on the same day.
Huh. Well, that's amazing, Fred. Well, we've got about 1 minute left. I'm going to read a little article here, and then we're going to get off the air. Well, you know, Fred, at the end of the summer, people go back to school. They don't have time to lay out in the sun anymore. So they start pulling out the sun lamps to try and keep that sun tan going into the fall and winter and into next spring. London study shows now that sun lamps that emit ultraviolet radiation have been linked to skin cancer. That has been known for several years, but now, Fred, they're finding out that it also increases the risk of eye cancer, that ultraviolet rays on your eye. So be mindful of that eye tumors and cancer in the retina and other parts of the eye increase with the use of these sun lamps. And be careful what you're doing. Make sure you have adequate protection for the eyes and the skin. And so with that final note, Fred, we are going to sign off, and we want to thank you once again for tuning in to the Cow Report, and we will be seeing you again next week right here. So adios.
Bye now.